is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome to DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Andrew, we've been talking a lot recently about the proliferation of protocols in the crypto space. And you've actually even used this very funny line, more protocols than apps, more apps than users. And I think it's interesting to see sort of this obsession with infrastructure that has dominated the investing world, clearly a lot of VC capital, but also just the general sort of mind share within crypto. But ultimately, like if this whole thing is going to reach its potential, we need a lot more people using end users using applications that actually are fun and interesting and do something different and actually add value to their lives. And we've got a good guest today to talk about this topic because he's involved with the NEAR protocol. And that's a protocol which you're very familiar with, AY, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. But basically, it's trying to kind of abstract away some of the more tricky parts of crypto in order to onboard many more people to many more different kinds of applications. So welcome to the show, Kendall Cole. He's the founder of Proximity Labs. Proximity Labs is a company a research and development firm that's focused primarily on the NEAR protocol. He was formerly at Consensys and the NEAR Foundation. Kendall's got deep Web3 product and business development expertise, and he, in addition to being a founder, leads strategy and outreach for NEAR's DeFi and scalability solutions. So the show is called DeFi Decoded. We do depart from that from time to time, but obviously interested to hear what what Kendall has to say about that. So Kendall, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your journey into the space. We're always curious. Consensys is a firm that I know really well. I was actually in Consensys' office the day that the Genesis block was mined for Ethereum in 2015. It was me, Joe Lubin, and two other people. And been quite a journey for them, but also for the whole ecosystem since that sort of starting point. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of folks, I got interested in Bitcoin for me in 2013, mainly because the price was going up and I had friends who were buying it. So I started to learn about the concept.
Thanks for the honest answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was it. But then I really fell in love with the idea of borderless money. I was like, this is just, and something that was very internet native. I was like, just feels very different. I've never read about anything like this. So it didn't do much for a while, just like I built some like kind of side projects, mainly about buying Bitcoin automatically with my bank accounts because I just didn't want to pay attention to it. And then a few years went by and I found myself after like a failed startup with some time to just research cool ideas, had some friends who had gone really deep on Ethereum. This was kind of the summer of 2017. And what ended up happening is basically a lot of the really high quality projects I was discovering at the time, I looked at the bottom and noticed it was like powered by or like part of Consensys Mesh, I think was the term they're using at the time.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, it seems like these guys are like a really great source of information for what's happening in this space and seem to be generating a lot of cool ideas. So fortunately, I was living in London and they were just opening an office. This was like September 2017. So joined them, basically worked on Ethereum dev tooling for about 2 years. Absolutely loved it. But then found myself, I actually just met the NEAR guys kind of at a hackathon. I think it was ETH Paris in 2019. At the time, I was a total ETH maxi, like didn't think any other L1 ever really made sense. I believed the idea of like Ethereum would just merge back any of the cool ideas. But they actually were really a lot of I think thinking at the forefront of what the user experience should look like. They were really bullish on this idea of like every single account should be a smart contract by default. And they wanted to bake that into the protocol. They had this idea of, being able to just like rotate keys for your account so you can permissionlessly trade, like atomically trade your account for others. They're really bullish on using a different virtual machine, WebAssembly at the time. And then they thought they could actually crack kind of the sharding problem that Ethereum researchers were really wrapping their head around. So all those things together and just the fact that it was a really quality team led me to joining them in 2019. And then I've been working there in the NEAR ecosystem ever since. And we spun out or like kind of set up a new entity, me and some of the earlier guys called Proximity about 3 years ago. Really just to have kind of an aligned, but like totally separate and way more research focused group that could help propel different parts of the ecosystem. And over the last just about year or so, we've been really focused on, this idea of chain abstraction and helping take to market some of the core products from the NEAR ecosystem there. which I can get into in a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to learning more about that, as well as some of the other work that Proximity is doing. Though I have to admit that the description of Proximity that you've given and what we have in our show notes does kind of sound a little bit like Consensys in the early days. Providing financial support to interesting projects, developing open source software. How much of your experience at Consensys in those early days of scaling, Ethereum has helped to sort of inform your approach to Proximity?
It's a great question. And yeah, I hope that we can be anywhere near as successful as Consensys has been over the years. So yeah, definitely. I was at Consensys from 2017 to 2019, which was an interesting time because I think they had been around for a couple of years. I guess you were there in the very earliest days. But it seemed like there was a time of pretty aggressive scaling. Like when I joined, I think it was like a couple hundred people, and then even within like a year, it got up to like 1,400. And Ethereum was also going crazy at the time. The price, there was a lot of activity coming in. There were people getting excited about building, a lot of investment. So it was really interesting to see the way they were kind of grasping about what does success for Consensys look like. That was a common topic. Was what is a good outcome for Consensys other than Ethereum does well, and then what does that even mean and how best to contribute. And I think one of the really crazy parts was at the time they hadn't raised any outside capital. It's basically just Joe funding it from his own ETH bags, which is the craziest business alignment I've still ever seen, right? It's he's got all this Ethereum. He knows he can spend some of it to basically invest in making Ethereum better, and that'll make his own sort of capital worth a lot more, which is just a really unique, I think, business proposition that's ever existed. And in some ways, Proximity kind of has that, where we have Near, and it's kind of a similar idea, where it's if Near does well, then our treasury will be healthy, and we'll be in a position, and we'll be able to continue to fund infrastructure or invest in high quality teams or do these kind of things. So I think somewhat that I definitely there was a lot of learnings about what worked for Consensys and what didn't. I think one of the things that ultimately ended up working really well is they've become quite important investors. They've had some investment funds who are invested in a lot of teams. They become very important for seeding kind of talent to the ecosystem. And then they themselves obviously do build some really, really key infrastructure, particularly MetaMask, but especially in the early days, things like Truffle and even still Infura, right?
Yeah.
So we don't maintain any, we don't have any sort of core products within Proximity ourselves. Everything we do is just open source and is more solving difficult research problems. But in a way, I think we have that similar type of alignment where it's if we are successful at helping cultivate talent through R&D, through investment, through grants, then we kind of can continue to basically have our organization exist, because we'll be able to continue funding these projects, because at least in theory, our treasury, which is primarily Near, will continue to be healthy, and we'll be able to do that. So I think in that way we are similar. And then it was helpful to have, I think, a bit of a deep view into what worked for Consensys and see how they've evolved over time, and then we can definitely take a lot of those principles into our organization.
So you guys are kind of almost a core devs, outsourced core devs in a way.
Yes and no. I mean, I'd say we're more we focus more on the application layer, and specifically on solving difficult problems at the application layer, but not actually running applications. We run zero applications. Everything we our what we do is basically figure out work with teams, try to onboard, try to get people interested in building in Near, see the problems that they're encountering, or the things they're trying to kind of solve for, or the things the industry is trying to kind of solve for. And then try to basically develop open source solutions to some of those problems, and then invest in teams who can take those and actually create real products and kind of commercialize solutions out of those. So, I mean, I guess in a way you could say we're core, sort of researchers, and we definitely do, invest with and work closely, try to support teams as best we can. But most of the core development is in different organizations than us. Near one is an example, Pagoda is another one, and there are a couple more.
So I think from my perspective as an application developer of Web3 apps, I always thought Near was pretty unique in terms of their go to market, as well as their infrastructure relative to other L1s. And a lot of it centers around focusing almost less on the crypto native audience and going after more mainstream use cases and users, as well as building out almost more of their own distribution in terms of like their app store and things like that. So I was just kind of curious, like from your perspective, like what is like Alex and I talk constantly about how there's just so many L1s. We have that line, more chains than apps, more apps than users. So how do you think about Near in terms of like their unique go to market as an L1 to get applications to the chain, as well as like which types of apps are they focusing on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's definitely evolved over time. But I think the one thing that stayed consistent is, in a way, Near's goal is always to like disappear, in the sense of like, we thought that blockchains were too prominent in the user experience at the time, like when Near was kind of created. And a lot of that was just that it was expensive. And so that's like kind of part of the, Near's core idea was like to actually have like a scalable model that could support all these like grand visions that a lot of the application developers have. But the other part of that was like to just really give developers the tooling they need in order to just hide the blockchain, or like reveal as much of the blockchain to the user as they determine was necessary for their product. And I think the reality, like one thing that's really changed over the years that we didn't expect is like the actual crypto native population has like actually expanded pretty tremendously. And I think there are a lot of people who know and care they're using a blockchain. And so serving that audience is totally valuable. And I think it's something we've actually started to invest more in than we did at the beginning. In the beginning, we were like, oh, it's just about mainstream adoption and like making it feel like Web2. And so we still do that. But I think we have the shift in vision has been like, we basically just want to let devs show as much or as little as they want, depending on their audience. So what we're at kind of now is like this, and this is where this idea of chain abstraction came from, is like it kind of means two different things, right? There's like chain abstraction, which is literally hiding the chain, abstracting away the chain or any chain entirely. And that's more appealing to, I think, people who are like, Web2 users who just want to solve some problem in their life, and a blockchain happens to be a part of that, right? But then on the other side, you do have like someone who's, pretty deep into it. They're like very deep in DeFi, like they're very invested. They're probably us, right? Like us and all the people that we encounter who they might want to use multiple chains. They might want to try out new things. They might want to like even create these complex applications that span multiple chains. But they do still want to be aware of the chain, but they just want simplicity of getting between these chains. They want like better UX. They still want, lower fees. They still want like better price discovery. And so now we actually really build for both of those. So we have an entire suite of applications. And I think the three most popular ones, there's Kitechain, which is like really actually just about kind of like serving ads to users and then having them like earn some kind of loyalty points. That can like get them deals on different applications. And they have millions and millions of users who have no idea that blockchain is underpinning this whole thing. And I think it's like typically the top app on dAppRadar, because it's completely abstracted the chain away from these users. And then similarly, there's Sweatcoin, which is a little more of a hybrid. It's like you don't have to know that a coin is a part of it, but you can. I mean, it's sort of in the name, and like they actually do try to be more of a pipeline from like Web 2 to Web 3, where like it's Web 2 people who can earn something by doing something simple in their daily life, and they can get some benefits that are off chain, but then they can get benefits on chain and learn about Web 3 if they're interested. And then finally, we've got like Hot Wallet, which is basically like a Telegram bot, way more for like a crypto native audience, but it's super easy to use. It's like just clicking a couple of buttons to get it started. It abstracts away a lot of the near sort of aspect of the chain a lot, and then you just can get going. So that's like one kind of category. And then we have a second category, which is a lot more of actually what I focus on and Proximity focuses on, which is it's a multi-chain world. And at least from our view, it's going to continue to be a multi-chain world. We do live in a world where there may actually be, on some cases, more chains, layers, or whatever than users, and certainly more apps than users in a lot of cases. That being said, like I think even in a world of contraction, we still see there being multiple blockchains. And what I think is really unfortunate for developers is they act like, from their perspective, they just want to serve as many users as they can, right? So they don't necessarily want to like embed themselves very deeply in a specific community, because that's like them basically making a huge bet that affects the entire timeline of their project. That's actually a bit orthogonal to the sort of benefits to the world they're trying to create with their product. And we see this is really suboptimal, even for choosing Near, right? This is something we've encountered, is like teams have to bet very heavily on Near. And like, that's great when they do, but that's not really what we want. We want them to bet on like a product vertical and being able to like solve some problem and acquire users. And so that's where we kind of started creating this like chain abstraction stack, we call it, which really is designed to let developers build their product once and then serve users on any chain. Maybe they're on Near, and that's great, when they are. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're on Bitcoin. Maybe they're on Ethereum. Maybe they're on chains that don't even exist yet, right? And so that's kind of like, that's like where we very much shifted, is like, it's sort of, it's not write once, run anywhere, but it's kind of like write once and then serve users anywhere. And like really build your product in a different way that's like actually pretty abstracted or agnostic to which chains people might want to interact with. So it's basically bifurcated. To the TLDR here for the listeners is like abstract the chain away entirely. We have a lot of products and abilities to do that, and we have some good examples with like Sweat, Hot Wallet, Kaichain, and even actually there was like the Cricket World Cup used Near in order to like basically have some fan engagement experiences, and I don't think anyone noticed they were using Near or especially a blockchain in that. And then the other side we have for both developers and for power users, it's like be agnostic to which chains your users or your communities will be interacting with, and build these like kind of truly multi-chain or chain agnostic experiences that can basically like move assets, custody assets, or even like manipulate state on any chain that either exists today or might exist in the future. And we can talk about how we sort of do that too.
So it's such a great explanation of Near, and I'm reminded of what you said actually at the outset in your introduction about the idea of boundaryless money or global money, the idea that we're not confined to any one financial system or institution or nation state or whatever. And I felt recently, as a host of a show and someone who's like an observer and investor in the space, that there's been this like insane balkanization of sorts that's happened as a result of all of these new infrastructure projects. And I've always felt like, look, I get that we're in the early days and there's lots of experimentation and there's lots of innovation that's happening, and all of this stuff is good. But at the same time, it feels like we're not creating an open internet of value that a lot of people kind of hoped for in the early days. And so when I hear you talk about this, it's a refreshing point of view. I love the idea of being able to, as like a group that came from a blockchain ecosystem, you're abstracting away that blockchain to try and deliver value for an end user or a customer or developer. I think that's a great perspective. And in the end, it's sort of like, grow the pie point of view, right? Instead of trying to like carve up the Web3 native user base and grab developers or TVL or whatever, it's about growing the whole thing. Not to sound cliched, but that's what it sounds like to me.
No, I'd say that's very much the case. And yeah, what's interesting, I remember when I started at Near in 2019, I mean, the industry was small and felt like it was either stagnant or shrinking. And so we had this conversation a lot where we were like, even if we wanted to just try to like take market share from the other L1s, which I mean, there weren't many, and none of them really had traction. Ethereum would have been the only one, and it was still a far cry of what it is today. So we were like, we have no choice but to grow the pie, because the pie just isn't big enough. Like a world in which Near is successful in 2019, it was a world where the pie had to be much bigger, because if we were just carving up, I mean, one, it was a small pie, and so just carving up a slice wasn't going to be very viable. And then two, it was just, it was kind of like competing over what, right? And so I think the industry would benefit from getting back to that. I mean, now we have grown a lot, right? I think there has been a lot of success over the last, like 5-ish years. And that's great. But yeah, we've definitely like tried to carve it up as much as we possibly can, despite growing it. And I think that those efforts are sometimes opposing, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
And what do you guys like? One of the things that was kind of interesting with Near in the end of the last cycle was making a push into sort of a late push into DeFi. I think Near sort of launched and then sort of right away canceled like their own stable coin, and then they also Near made a big push into DeFi, just I think like with like a grants program and things like that. I guess how do you think about like the DeFi ecosystem within Near? Is it a big focus? Is there certain like areas of DeFi that you think Near is particularly well suited for? Just kind of curious, like what's the state of DeFi on Near?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think DeFi is like crypto. I mean, Bitcoin is basically a DeFi application, right? If you really boil it down. So I mean, I think me personally, at least, I see a lot of crypto as DeFi. And just different ways to sort of shop it. So it has been important to Near for a long time. I think at the time in 2019 or 2019, like 2020, 2021, 2022, like that wave of like right post launch, the the focus was always like, okay, we really need, in order for like an L1, an alt L1, like a non-Ethereum L1 to get traction, I think you need like a unique ecosystem, right? It doesn't necessarily, like, it's got to be unique. It's got to kind of like be a different set of products. It's got to be doing something that, just isn't finding traction in other ecosystems. And I think the first wave of DeFi was very much like, okay, every DeFi ecosystem needs an AMM. Every DeFi ecosystem needs a money market. You need stable coins. You need, token launch pads, like all these kind of things. And that was kind of a wave 1.0 of DeFi for Near. And some of those projects are still doing quite well, right? I mean, the largest, the first and largest AMMs and money markets are still going and actually reaching some, by several metrics, kind of like highs now. But a lot of the ones that were just doing more of like, this is working on another chain. We should do it on Near because people are excited about Near for other reasons, and that'll benefit us. Like, we have seen some of those kind of fade away. And I think this is true across a lot of ecosystems, right? I mean, we saw this there was like the L1 rotation trade that was really popular last cycle. Happened on Polygon, it happened on Avalanche, it happened on Solana, it happened on Near. And I think if you look at the products on all of those ecosystems that are still persisting, it's because they found some angle to tackle that was kind of different, right? And I think for Near, that's also sort of become true. So like the way the DeFi ecosystem kind of looks now, so there are some of those like just like core primitives that are doing quite well because they are that thing for Near and they serve a need. And that's basically like this app called Ref Finance and Burrow in particular, which are respectively the AMM and the money market. And also this product called Orderly that's also been doing quite well in other ecosystems. That's an order book. That was kind of one of the first attempts I think we saw at like taking advantage of Near's unique scalability and building like a high performance, both perp and spot order book, which has continued to do quite well. And so off the back of all of those efforts, and I think now the way we've seen the ecosystem really shift is focusing on like what is Near's unique differentiator today. And it's actually this kind of chain abstraction stack. And to a lesser degree, but also one that I think will become extremely prominent over time, it's AI products. And we've seen a lot of those products actually flock to Near, especially with the excitement about that space. But so, yeah, like the way we see the ecosystem developing now, the majority of the projects that are building, they're trying to build these like truly chain agnostic or even like multi-chain, but boiled into one user experience type of products. And so we have a couple of teams building DEXs that are actually allow you to trade any asset on any chain. And it actually works effectively by trading public keys using this distributed MPC network that we call chain signatures. And we see other products that are building like money markets where you can use any asset on any chain as collateral, or even, effectively a public key, which could actually even have, multiple assets on multiple different chains and use that as collateral to borrow stable coins on Near. And then we have other teams looking at the Athena pattern, right, which I think has been one of the big winners of this cycle. But, looking to build like a more trust minimized or even like a fully decentralized Athena, where you can have basically like, use a collateral asset on Bitcoin to borrow USDC on Near to then CCTP that to DYDX and open a 1x short position. And the LTV that you borrowed all of this at is 100% because the lender knows that you're going to have the collateral asset and also the 1x short position. And that's really what they're lending against. So they're kind of protected in their downside. And that's kind of a product that really you can't build today at all. And now with some of the technology we're rolling out, you can. So that's kind of what we're seeing is becoming like the unique value prop of the Near DeFi ecosystem is like there's this entirely new set of applications that are enabled by some of these chain abstraction features. And that's where we sort of see teams going. So to tie a bow on all of that, it's like our vision for Near has always been to build a unique ecosystem, right? Like we didn't want to see products built that were just like the same thing but different but the same thing but on Near that had happened on Ethereum and that had happened on even Solana or others. And I think it took some time to get there, but like we're really seeing like these products that are just completely differentiated. There's nothing else out there like them. They're really like paving new ground that are starting to build, which has been really exciting because I think that's like one of the proof points we've always been looking for over the last 5 years is like, do we have a unique ecosystem that stands on its own feet and that attracts other builders who want to like build into that new unique ecosystem rather than just looking at like eeny, meeny, miny, mo of which chain they should pick.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
Andrew, just a quick question. So last week or 2 weeks ago, I was in New York at the Coinbase Summit 2024, and it was a lot of like institutions and Wall Street types. And one of the big takeaways was that a lot of big traditional financial firms have now completely abandoned private blockchains, or DLT, and are now building on public networks. And it seems like right now Ethereum is sort of the biggest beneficiary of that, though one could make the case that Base might end up gobbling up a lot of that more traditional sort of stuff because it's sort of Wall Street adjacent almost. And that was evident by this event. But I'm just curious, like, is Near, so talking about as things become more mainstream and as more kinds of users come on board, inevitably some of those users are going to be enterprises and more traditional financial firms. What has your experience been like with those kinds of organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. Recently, I was giving a talk at Consensys and had some of those organizations come up to me afterwards, and they were pretty excited about the idea of, they were basically like, there's a couple of chains that we think would be reasonable for our product to exist on. However, we don't have a really great way to like seamlessly manage this product moving between these different chains in a way that's actually non-custodial. And so they were pretty excited about the idea that we have of this like kind of chain signatures, like basically take a Near account and let that account sign transactions for any chain, which is managed by like a decentralized MPC network. And so like I think that's like what, at least what we've seen from some of the conversations with these institutional types is like they kind of are also, I mean, it depends on how early of a mover. Like this group was like they're a little more sophisticated. They've been kind of paying attention for a long time, and so I think they have woken up to the idea of like there can actually be multiple chains or even multiple L2s at least that sort of make sense for their product. And so they're looking for ways to kind of just simplify that, right? Like to take that potential fragmentation and abstract it away from like their clients, their customers, and even their developer team. I think for the institutions who are looking to just like dip their toe in the water, Ethereum is probably the obvious choice, right? I mean, it has like definitely the best pedigree. It's, the largest outside of Bitcoin, the largest programmable network, has a lot of like, I mean, BlackRock has like listed products there, right? It's like, it's pretty established. So I think we'll probably still see, a lot of the institutions dipping their toes in the water to go for Ethereum first. But it seems like there is developing like a pipeline of like, as they become more sophisticated and comfortable with crypto, they recognize that there are benefits and, things that the Ethereum community isn't necessarily prioritizing that does sort of fit their product and their audience much better. And maybe that's Solana, maybe that's Near, maybe that's Base, or even a combination of these. And when it's a combination of these, I think that's where our product is quite compelling for them. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it developing, is like for these teams that really want to serve a bunch of different chains and also be kind of protected against the proliferation of new chains, they really benefit from using Near.
Yeah, interesting. Andrew, I know you.
Yeah. One of the questions I also had was, how is, like, one of the big questions, again, kind of in the L1 space, is whether focus on scaling vertically or scaling horizontally. And like the sort of, like the debate of, should we just be a monolithic chain with tons of TBS, or, follow more what Ethereum's roadmap in terms of just having like L2s. I think we're now into L3s as well. I'm kind of curious, like how is Near thinking about its sort of scaling roadmap? Are we going to see sort of like Near L2s in the future? Just kind of curious what that looks like over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Near made a big bet a few years ago to scale more horizontally. We don't do it through L2s, we do it through shards. And I mean, in a way, you can think of like each shard as effectively like an L2, but it's typically homogeneous L2, like using the same virtual machine. But then we have one blockchain. So Near's sharding design is even unique amongst the sharded chains in that like usually they have like a different chain effectively per shard. We have just one chain. We have a bunch of different shards, and each of those shards basically like combine. It's almost like in a way, it's starting to look about like some of the visions of L2s where like you have like an ag layer that like where each of the L2s posts like the state root change, and then that's finalized into a single blockchain that's like settled amongst all the validators. And that's actually how Near has looked from day one. And the biggest challenge that presents is that the communication between each of the different shards or L2s or whatever is asynchronous. And a lot of people viewed that as like sort of a non-starter for a long time. But I think our perspective on it was that like most applications do not need synchronous communication. And if you do, there are ways to basically manage that. Like we have already ways like, and we do this with our shard called Aurora, which is basically like an EVM simulated environment where everything on Aurora does have synchronous communication. And so like that kind of single shard communication is still possible for applications that need it. But the reality of it is that most don't. And I think it's been really interesting. Like even Vitalik last week was talking about how like he thought synchronous composability was overrated because a lot of the like layer 2 scaling roadmap sort of makes the assumption that communication between these L2s will be asynchronous. So yeah, I mean, we've always looked more like the L2 roadmap, just with like, we made the assumption, we were like, developers should not know or care which shard they're on. That was like very intentional from day one. And the idea was actually that contracts and state could move between shards as we had applications that got more popular. And so we did that recently, where there was like, I think it was both Sweatcoin, Kaiching, and Hot all had way too many sort of transactions for a single shard each. And so now I think they live on 3 different shards. And that sort of resharding process happened. And in order just to like make the network now just function quite well, even though the shards are, basically even though there's the activity on those applications has grown since that resharding happened. And now we're even researching how like you could have a single application that could itself be split up into multiple shards. So before the idea was like one application could have one shard. Now we're even thinking like one application might have multiple shards. But developers do not actually need to reason about this. Like that's the best part is like the which shard your application is on is entirely hidden away, entirely abstracted. And that's been like a decision that, we made pretty early on. So I would say that like we're kind of more aligned for sure with the horizontal scaling roadmap. The difference is that we've sort of been building for it and trying to like get the developer experience right from day one. And we did have to bite the bullet of like, hey, you do have to treat every cross-contract call as asynchronous, and there are some considerations for that. And at first, developers weren't sure because they're used to kind of the Ethereum or Solana paradigm, like building just on the L1 with everything synchronous. But the benefit for us is that now we have a lot of best practices that have developed around how to do that. And so I think that burden has kind of been alleviated a bit in the Near ecosystem. And we're seeing like a lot of teams now in the Ethereum ecosystem having to reason about that. And I mean, ultimately they'll end up, coming to a lot of the same conclusions most likely.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting too, because the sharding at one point was seen as kind of like the, it was the way that every L1 was going to sort of scale. And then I would say like recently it's become, the focus has shifted more towards L2s. And I would say like more recently within L2s from like optimistic rollups to like, ZK rollups, all sorts of things, ZK EVM. One of the things too, I think with Near, again, correct me if I'm wrong, was it initially started off as non-EVM, and then they added an EVM aspect to it after the fact. I guess I'm just kind of curious, like which sort of, can you just sort of speak to that and whether, what kind of developers the chain's been like more focused on, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Near's virtual machine it is and will continue to be WebAssembly. So that's what we launched with. So most smart contracts were written in Rust. At the time, 2019, almost nobody was writing smart contracts in Rust. I mean, we weren't the only ones who made that call. Like Solana did as well. Polkadot did. Cosmos, for the most part, there's like Cosm Wasm. But yeah, it was challenging. It was really challenging to find devs, convince them like to find smart contract devs who wanted to write in Rust or new devs. Like it was hard. So part of that's what led to us, basically taking advantage of the fact that we have like a pretty expressive Rust virtual machine. There was a team called Aurora, who now like has since been like, they kind of are their own company, who they wanted to solve this problem. And so what they did is they actually like created an EVM interpreter as a Rust smart contract on Near, and then created some additional tooling like a JSON RPC kind of converter that converts from like an Ethereum RPC call to effectively a Near call. And then they have like a meta transaction relayer that lets users pay in ETH, but then like ultimately there's a Near settlement where that transaction is sent as Near and paid in Near. And so the goal is basically like you can build on top of Near, but it'll feel exactly like the DevX of deploying to an EVM chain. And for users, they can use all of their EVM compatible wallets. And so that was shipped, I mean, a few years ago now, probably about eight months to a year after launching mainnet is when that first went live. And so what was really interesting is that at the beginning of that, I think like almost like most developers gravitated towards the EVM world, that EVM environment and building on top of Aurora. But what we've seen in the time since then is I would say that the average team who comes to Near now actually writes their contracts in Rust and builds for the WebAssembly VM. And I would attribute a lot of that to the fact that like, Solana got traction and got people open to the idea of building in Rust. Cosmos got traction. There's a lot of great, like high quality, Cosmos Wasm developers. Yeah. Polkadot got some traction. Near got some traction. So I think that like now we're even seeing like Arbitrum, right, has Arbitrum Stylus, and their ideas like, WebAssembly, write your smart contracts in Rust. So I think we've seen, just a shift of like, developers are way more open to, and even auditors, right? The entire kind of like industry around smart contracts has evolved to now consider multiple languages. And we, of course, have even newer chains with like not proprietary, but like a net new language in Move that I think a lot of them even push that as a strength, right? Whereas in 2019, no, like being non-EVM was absolutely a weakness. And so props to the industry for, I think, now considering new languages potentially even a strength, which is like a crazy shift. So yeah, basically the TLDR on that is like now we actually see a lot of teams, the average team builds in Rust, but we do still see some teams kind of deploy on Aurora as like a great way to like get your product into your system with minimal overhead. So the Layer 0 team made that decision to deploy to Aurora. And the best part is that all of the other Near contracts can still interact with that Layer 0 endpoint because Aurora is actually fully interoperable with the rest of Near because it actually is just a Near smart contract.
Yeah, so interesting. And I think that actually ties back as well to the idea of non-crypto native users and even the developers, right? Like if you want to attract people to build in this ecosystem, doing so in a language they already understand and knowing that they can sort of build across chains, I think is a great leveler and helps to sort of lower barriers. This is an amazing discussion. I have so many other questions, but we're kind of running out of time here. Just maybe if you don't mind, sort of give us what you think the next couple of years looks like, not just for Near, but for the whole world of Web3. I feel like we're in this really interesting transitional moment where the market has rebounded, and a lot of that has been driven by renewed interest in large cap tokens like Bitcoin and ETH because of these ETFs. And there are some narratives that have emerged. You mentioned decentralized AI or the idea of AI and blockchain. DePIN is something that people are excited about. Meme coins, but I'm not sure that we've really kind of latched onto a really compelling narrative at the application layer that is going to help pull us forward into this next era. We've seen that in the past. You mentioned, the DeFi era. We saw with NFTs and collectibles and so forth. I just love to sort of get your thought, more big picture on what needs to happen or what should happen for us to get to this next stage, this promised land where the technology is being used not only by a growing crypto native community, but by the world writ large.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that we are finally close. Maybe we've been close for a while, but I think we're close to the infrastructure being where it needs to be. I mean, certainly there's still problems to be solved, but like I think for the most part, the scale, several different scaling roadmaps I think will work to some degree. And so like developers will have options where like they don't have to worry as much about scalability, whether that's an L2, whether that's Near, whether that's Solana, maybe a combination of them. And so hopefully that means that we will see, a renewed push on both the investment side, on the developer side, all of that into like, what are the use cases building applications? But I think one thing that's under discussed, but like that I believe very strongly is like even DeFi, right? Like we see all these DeFi applications, but the first wave of DeFi products, they really wanted to be protocols more than applications.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to be infrastructure, and they kind of got forced into building applications. That ultimately that was a good thing because like we need the apps. But I think even crypto as a whole, like even most of the applications are still really more infrastructure than application. And I think what we have is this really great base to like to launch high quality assets, and then the financialization can occur very rapidly because we have all this amazing infrastructure that looks like DeFi apps. But we are still kind of missing high quality net new assets that are sort of taking advantage of the fact that like your path to market as an asset creator can be so much quicker and smoother from an infrastructure level. Now, so there's finally teams who are really starting to do this. I think there's like the push into real world assets, and that's mainly just taking assets that exist in the real world and trying to create, like, get them on chain, and hopefully for the issuers who I think are doing it correctly, expanding, making it easier for people globally to access these assets, ideally people who didn't really have much access before. So I think this is the first like step into it, but I'm kind of hopeful that we'll actually see like totally new markets that don't even really have anything to do with crypto. They're just like a new market, but they look at crypto and realize, oh, all the infrastructure is there. Like, I just have to, do the legal work, do whatever it is to like make the asset exist, but then I can have it be like listed, in all this infrastructure. It can just like be on dexes. It can be tradable. It can be used as collateral. It can be, there's derivatives of it, like all those different things. So that's kind of where I think we need to go, is like, we gotta use this incredible infrastructure base we built, not just like blockchains, but all the DeFi stuff, all the financialization, and increasingly more and more the legal layer. I mean, I think still work to be done there, but teams are starting to really invest in that. And then like pursue
the legal layer. Just to clarify, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you mean like regulations or that need to be?
Yeah, definitely regulations, right? I mean, I think it would be hard. It'd be hard to issue a net new asset today because there's still a lot of like lack of clarity globally. I think some markets are getting much more clear, and hopefully in the next couple of years we'll see more clarity on that globally. But I think that's a part of it. And then also, I mean, looking at what the RWA companies are doing, like, it's not a tech innovation, it's a legal innovation, right? Like, it's made like, if you look at Ondo, if you look at Mountain, if you look at any of these guys. Yeah, I mean, really, it's a lot of like structuring, like that's the product, and then they're using simple stuff, right? Like ERC20 tokens, right? Like that part is is pretty basic.
Yeah, got it. No, that's really great. Well, listen, it was a real pleasure. I enjoyed this conversation so much. So thank you very much for joining us. I don't know, Andrew, unless you have any other follow-up questions, that kind of concludes today's episode. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it, Kendall, and we hope to see you again soon, maybe with an update. I don't know, 6 months, 12 months from now. We'd love to touch base with our guests afterwards to see how things have progressed. And you've been a terrific sport, and we'd love to have you back. So thank you very much. That's it for this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. Don't forget to like this episode, to share it, to write a comment and tell your friends. That's how people find the show. Until next time, we will see you later. Take care. Bye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.